Hi, my name is Michael Fitzgerald. I'm from the School of Education at Edith Cowan University, and I'm also the Chief Editor of AstroEDU at the moment. So this talk's going to be about the idea behind the project and where we're at now and future plans. So initially this was started off and is still managed by Edward Gomez from Las Cumbres Observatory and Pedro Russo from Leiden. There's an editor-in-chief, which is me, and then there's an editor-at-large, which is Jaya. For a large part of astroEDU, Talina did a lot of the groundwork managing the astroEDU reviews and getting them up online. So a shout out to him. Currently, there's a Commission C1 working group in astronomy education resources. Its primary goal is to transition astroEDU over into the Office of Astronomy Education, and it's currently led by Edward Gomez. So the mission statement for astroEDU is to make the best astronomy activities accessible to educators around the world. The peer-reviewed, open access, as well as astronomy, include Earth and space sciences. Also, the activities are able to be improved, distributed, reviewed, and remixed as well. So just to quickly go through the review process, an activity gets submitted, and then there's a pre-review for completeness, which is just have you filled everything out. And then there's an initial kind of quick read over to make sure it actually looks like an activity and it's worth kind of someone spending some time to review it. Then it goes into this cycle where it's sent to two reviewers. One's an education focused person and another is a scientist who's on the content area of what the topic's about, and they both do reviews and they both judge, report on the quality of activity, sent back to the author, and then the author makes adjustments just like a normal review, and then it either goes for another cycle and then it gets sent out when it's become acceptable. Then the editorial board approve the activity and basically it's put up online. So that's the process. I thought I might spend just a moment having a look at the peer review form. So initially when we tried to do peer review, we sent it out to educators and scientists, and we got variable feedback, which is the experience with a scientific paper as well. You send out your paper to be reviewed, and depending on what side of the bed the reviewer gets out of, you get either that's great or 10 pages of irrelevant criticism, or something useful that makes your paper even better. In this situation with the activities, there's no real kind of historical precedent for reviewing education activities. So the reviews, the reviews are what they were, but there's specific things that we're looking for in reviews that we didn't seem to be getting from the reviews. So we kind of made the review process. You can give whatever comments you want, but here are some of the core things that we'd like you to think about when you are looking through the activity. So for the content specialist or scientist, you want to go through, make sure the terminology is accurate, you're not giving the wrong idea about certain aspects of the science, where things are missing that you might want to add it in. Is it likely to help students understand scientific practices which may or may not be relevant for a particular activity? And for the educator, let me just pull that up. The education thing is more about how the activity actually helps student learn. So will the process in the activity, does it look like you'll achieve the goals and outcomes that the activity is intended to? And also such things as would this actually work in a classroom, or is it kind of aimed too high, too low, or takes too long, etc. So we have very specific questions. So if you ever want to become a reviewer, get in contact with us and we'll put you on the list. And know that rather than just having a blank sheet of paper and it being a mystery, there's some very specific guiding questions that makes the review process go smoother for you and ends up with a higher quality review and feedback for us to give to the author. So what does it look like? This is the front page. So here you can search for the activities you want, pretty simple. You can also browse through the activity collection, see all the activities, and submit your activities. So here's a possible front page you might get. It randomizes so you can see a new set of activities each time you look. Here they just happen to be all space awareness activities. So here's a sample activity, so seasons around the world, some diagrams. Everything is tagged, so it has a theme, what age, how long it will take, and then you go into the activity itself, which has the goals, the learning objectives, and on the right here you can see more of the tagging. So keywords, whether it's a group or individual activity, whether it can be supervised or not, how much it costs, what location it's in, the core skills that you are addressing in the activity, the type of learning activity, content area, and astronomy scientific categories. There's also a little bit on the right here where you have worksheets and certain attachments and stuff. So things that don't fit in the standard format of an astroEDU activity can be out here as an attachments, which there usually are some attachments that because maybe you have a printout of a sundial or a diagram or something that students need to work on. So there's always an attachment or two. So here's background information for the teacher, and then it's about to go into the full activity description, but you have a sharing capacity. You can download it as a PDF, rich text format, or EPUB. Go to repositories, the DOI citation, and acknowledgements as well. It's just a typical example of what's the effect of the angle of the sun hitting the ground on the energy provided. Here's a sample of the PDF that gets downloaded. Here's some activities. So you got measure the sun's rotation period. You get some really complicated stuff like the 4-point backyard diurnal parallax method to measure distance to an asteroid. Then you have things that you can do with younger students. So this is for ages 4 to 8, going out and watching the evening sky as it's going down and observing. Making models. Then the apps that you can use online to explore stellar evolution. So that's just a few examples of what's there. So the current work during 2020, everything is going relatively slow, but we're currently analysing and auditing the activities to see what's there and what seems to be missing. So we're looking at the astronomy literacy big ideas document and the recently completed OECD curriculum review to identify what sort of activities are needed, and then we'll be inviting people to provide specific activities. We're also going to set up the site so that it's searchable by the big ideas literacy and also the OECD curriculum tags. So you could say I want to do year 9 and 10 in Sweden, and it will bring up activities that are relevant to that year level. And we figured out what kind of content is in the curriculum around the world. So we have that where is astronomy taught, and then we have the big ideas in astronomy, which is what actually is the knowledge that you should have if you're going to be called astronomically literate. And of course the two don't overlap. The literacy document is bigger than what's in the high school curriculum. Of course the big ideas document includes a lot of stuff that's more relevant to young adults, whereas the OECD curriculum review was basically up to the high school. So the working group at the moment for astroEDU is mechanically moving it over to OAE, which includes new hosting on the web for the journal system and also the astroEDU website. But as we're moving this all to a new server, we'll be incorporating this new tagging system where you can access activities by country and year level curricula, and also by the individual big ideas literacy tags, and then all of that moving over into the Office of Astronomy Education. From now we have this kind of scaffold from which we can actually kind of analyze what's in astroEDU and what's not. We can start to have a look at of the activities that are in astroEDU, what curriculum elements do they cover, what big ideas do they cover, and then we can address two things, which is, are we covering what is being taught or what is mandated to be taught by a national curricula, and do we also provide for what should be taught? So in the more expansive big ideas, do we cover those things as well? So some of the early analysis, which is actually less relevant to astroEDU, but just generally relevant, as we cross-matched the OECD themes, which is curriculum themes, so celestial motion, Earth, Sun, Moon, optics, gravitational waves, cosmology, with the relevant big idea, and sometimes there is no overlap, and then with where they're taught in the curriculum. And interestingly, one of the interesting things I found is there's not much at 9 and 10, even though that's a crucial year for people picking what higher level subjects that going to do in year 11 or 12 and on to university. So this is worldwide. So this is across all the OECD. So you can see there's a lot at the end of primary school, as we call it in Australia, or start of middle school, as you'd call it in the US, and a lot at the end of high school, but in the sort of mid-range, and not as much astronomy. We have astronomy in year 9 and 10 in Australia, and it's really useful time to have it. That's a conversation to have beyond astroEDU, but just to show you the general overview of what is taught where, mainly at the end of high school and the end of primary school / start of middle school. So if we have a look at what activities we do have in astroEDU, we have the astroEDU themes, the OECD curriculum themes down here, and then what activities we have in astroEDU. So you can see there's a lot to be done. There's usually 1 or 2 activities. If you squint, you can see a very light peach when there's 1 activity, and then white when there's 0. Up the top we have multiple, which is activities are relevant at multiple year levels, so it's not that there's nothing. But you can see that for when it's aimed at a specific year level, we have primary celestial motion covered fairly well, and there's some middle school cosmology covered very well, but we have a lot of activities that we could want people to develop to cover the curriculum areas at the various school levels. If we look at by big idea, it looks a bit better. It's still, we have most of our stuff at primary school. Here we have some stuff in middle school and not as much at secondary, covering big ideas. I'll make these slides available, so if you want to cross-reference and see which big ideas link to what, here is a distribution of activities according to big idea. So the current state is we're just under 100 activities currently. There's about 15 in review or finalized but not uploaded yet, waiting for the site to be transitioned over to the new hosting. There's another 10 or so that are waiting to go out for review. The server is pretty imminent. It'll happen over the next few weeks. And by the end of 2020, we hope to have the analysis ready of what we have, what it seems like we should have, and some specific suggestions for activities to see if people want to try and fill up some of these gaps that we have. Thank you.